Joan Quinn Profiles. As an editor for Andy Warhol's Interview, the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner, LA Style, and Detour magazines, Joan covered the social set, the Hollywood hotshots, the international art scene, the mysteries of food, the excitement of travel, and the fabulous world of fashion. Joan continues to find creative people on the cutting edge who make things happen. Here's Joan Quinn.
Hi, I'm Joan Quinn, and welcome to the Joan Quinn Profiles. Waiting to be profiled is Dennis Burrage and author Armen Antonian. Chef Dennis Burrage was born and raised in Southern California. How long after leaving Los Altos High School did you decide to go to Culinary Institute?
Immediately.
Oh, right away?
Right away. When I went to my 20-year high school reunion a few years ago, everyone said, did you become a chef? Because they knew in high school that I was going to be a professional football player, was my aspiration, or to become a chef.
Is that right?
Yes.
So what Culinary Institute did you go to?
The CCA, Culinary Academy in San Francisco. That's where I studied.
And do all these culinary academies have different specialties, or do they just...
Well, they hit and highlight a lot of the foundation techniques of the way you should be cooking, and but they're different in their own regard because there's different chefs that instruct.
Oh, that's
but the teacher to student ratio is what the different schools are highlighting as far as what size they are. I went to the Culinary Academy because it was much smaller than the CIA in New York, and so I can get much more attention.
That's what I wondered. You got more attention, but did you go to college, or was that your college education, more or less?
Actually, I went to Los Angeles Trade Tech College, where I got an AA degree, and they had a chef program there. And because it's a city-run college, city college, there was limited funds, and so I felt that what I learned there, I needed to know some more. And so I had won an Epicurean scholarship as the best student there in 1983, and so that helped me to pole vault to the Culinary Academy in San Francisco.
Oh, how great!
So I studied in two different culinary programs.
So were they really different? Or did you take what you knew at Trade Tech up to Culinary Academy?
A lot different. Like I said, city-run school programs, limited funds, but got a little bit of the foundation, but I wanted to know more.
What happens, say, in a city-run thing? Do they, like, train you for little diners and things like that?
A lot. Back 20, 30 years ago, what they called fry cooks, line cooks.
Yeah, right.
But I wanted to be a chef, and so I wanted to know a lot more than that, than what my grandfather had taught me.
I was going to say, you came from a family of chefs. Who cooked in your family?
Well, my grandfather was a chef, and my father was a butcher.
Oh.
And my grandfather owned his own restaurants in Ohio, where we're originally from. And so when my mother and her brothers and sisters were younger, they worked in my grandfather's restaurant, and my grandmother helped him cook. She's not a chef, but she's a fabulous cook, wonderful.
So she knew, so you knew and you saw this all the way along. I knew you weren't born in Los Angeles. I knew you were born somewhere else, but you were raised in LA, weren't you? Or Southern California?
Since I've been 7 years old, yes.
Oh, since you were a little boy, okay.
Yes.
I thought you were from the East, but I couldn't remember where.
Mansfield, Ohio.
So did they bring food, like Midwest food? Show come to an end.
Well, they should come to Idlewild.
Yes.
On the 21st of
Mashed potatoes and gravy and meatloaf.
Do you know how to do that?
Yes.
You do that, but you're
yes.
not doing that now because you're cooking at a very fancy
That's true.
restaurant at the Burrage Hotel called Diaghilev.
Diaghilev restaurant. We have two restaurants at the Burrage Hotel on Sunset Strip. And one of them is 1020, which we have live entertainment, and we have a more of a California flair menu. And then we also have Diaghilev, which is our upscale fine dining, award-winning, Zagat award-winning restaurant, which is Tuesday through Saturday, dinner only.
And that's you, Mr. Chef.
It's me, the whole hotel, the entire hotel.
1022 is you?
1020.
Okay, that's the thing. Here you are, someone who obviously loves to cook and plan everything, and you're working at a hotel. Why aren't you in a small restaurant?
Well,
Or in a restaurant?
I've worked in restaurants, catering companies. I owned my own restaurant at one point, and I like to multitask. And if you're crazy for that, working in hotels, because we also have room service, which we're
I know.
Yeah, room service and 2 restaurants and lots of catering. We do lots of weddings.
But do you get to cook, or are people doing? You're like a manager.
Like I tell a lot of people, cooks cook and I orchestrate.
So that's what you're doing?
The orchestra leader in front of a band is very quiet, but he's coordinated. He knows how to do all these tasks and knows how to play all these instruments. However, he's the one that's leading and guiding the other people who are successful, my cooks, my pastry chefs, my banquet chefs.
But you must hire all of those people so you know that they know. You
Correct.
have a relationship so
Correct.
that you can tell them what to do.
Correct, and train them as well. Teach them my style and what the direction that the hotel wants to go in regards to the food programs.
So, if you were in a small restaurant that you owned, would you be doing? You'd be doing maybe the same thing, but in a different way.
Different way. Probably have my hands on most of the plates, and in making sure they go out. A restaurant is what it is. It's just that's the only thing you're concentrating on. But my efforts now are toward purchasing and food costs and controlling labor, and all the stewards and keeping the kitchen clean and keeping up with the health standards of the health department. Also, both restaurants, and it's a lot of different things going on.
You have a lot of things to do that a chef maybe. I don't know if you were trained to do those things.
You learn over time. You learn.
I know. Yeah. The hotels basically have grander people coming to them because they do big banquets. Like you've cooked for the Queen, you've cooked for the Pope, you've cooked for President George Bush. What happens in a situation like that? I mean, are you just a nervous wreck?
At first, my first, when I was, I think I was 24 years old, I was, the Wilshire Grand Hotel used to be the Hilton back in the early 80s, and the Pope was in town at that particular time, and so the executive chef and the restaurant chef, Italian gentleman, won the bid to cook for him while he was in town. So I was on the staff and one of the cooks. I happened to be the banquet chef at the time, and that was fun. It was very nerve-wracking to be young. And then 2 years later, got a chance to cook for President Bush.
Oh, President Bush.
Yes. And so President Bush, the father, the first one, I had a little bit more experience and knew what to do. And that helped me to move on to the different stages of different cooking for a lot of different celebrities and dignitaries.
Well then, when Magic Johnson opened his theaters, he had 1,000 people there with the mayor and a lot of celebrities.
Michael Jordan, Magic, Magic had all his friends and all the people he knows, and he invited them. He wanted to open. That's when he started his business out of being a basketball player into becoming a businessman. And so he invited me. I did all the coordination for all the catering and from A to Z, and it was challenging, but it was a lot of fun.
Well, you must have. I mean, you have to then order the rentals.
Yes.
You have all of those kind
security,
of things to do.
The bartenders, valet. I mean, I had to wear different hats, a lot of different hats. It was challenging, months and months of meetings, but once it was over, it was very rewarding.
But for one event, right? Was it one night?
One night.
For 1,000 people?
But that helped me to do some other things for him and for others after that.
Smaller things, I hope.
I've done some big things. I've done some small things as well.
Yeah.
Birthday parties and weddings, lots of different weddings and friends and gatherings and children's birthdays.
So when all these celebrities come, can you hang out?
I have.
Oh,
And not at first, but you're working. But once they see you a couple of times at a couple of events, you're more like the family or the friend.
That's the other thing I was going to ask you. When you have your own restaurant, besides being in the kitchen, you want to come out and see your clientele because you want them to know you and you want them to have this rapport with you so they come back. What happens in a hotel?
Well, especially now, everybody wants to see the face behind the food.
Do they do the same?
And a lot of times, people come to our hotel and they're guests and they don't understand that there's different restaurants and different things going on throughout the hotel. We also have pool dining up on our roof.
Oh yeah.
And so I'm requested at different times. I want to see the chef. Oh, this is fabulous. Who's the chef?
Oh.
And so a lot of times I go out and these people see me moving around the hotel, going through the lobby, going to meetings,
I see.
So yeah, I get around.
So they do want to see you. In 1997, long ago, you won the James Beard Best Top Black Chef Award?
Myself and Marcus Samuelson.
Oh, Marcus.
Marcus in Aquavit.
He's fabulous, yeah.
Yes, he is. We won that award.
You won it together?
Yes. And then...
are you as tall as he is?
Actually, he's a little shorter than I am.
Oh!
And a gentleman named Wayne Gibson. He's
I don't know
also
Wayne.
on the East Coast.
Did you cook at the James Beard House then?
No, we cooked at Mondavi House.
Oh.
Actually,
oh
I'm
my,
sorry.
Oh, so up north.
It was Kendall Jackson Winery
In California?
In California, in Sonoma. We cooked a dinner with everybody who was involved in getting us elected, and it was about 100 people. It was fun. We had a great time, and being honored as a James Beard Award winner as America's top black chefs, that was a great honor.
That
for
was
us.
great. Well, your food, I'm going to just show some of it because we don't have too long to talk. Tell us, this is from the Diaghilev restaurant.
Correct. That's one of the entrees. That's the kalubiak. That's a salmon wrapped with sturgeon mousse, and it's a flaky phyllo dough pastry, celery root puree, and a balsamic red wine onion puree.
How do you know to cook Russian food when you come from such a American background?
Diverse. Actually, the Russian restaurant Diaghilev has a heavy French overtones, and so I'm French classically trained originally.
Oh, I see. So I smell a lot of the same kind of sauces that would be French. What is this?
And that's the veal and duck palamini. It's a veal and duck ravioli.
Pull one out like that so we can see.
Veal and duck ravioli with a saffron emulsion, and as you see, it's a lot of my cooking has some fresh herbs in it. Yeah.
Tastes good.
Tasty.
And then one more. Maybe you can pass that to me.
Sure.
While I lick my fingers.
It's our house smoked salmon. We smoke our own salmon in house.
Do you know how to do that?
Oh, sure.
Oh.
Sure. Smoked salmon and our little herb Parmesan cheese and anchovy breadstick. It complements that smoked salmon very well.
This is great. And what's the difference between this and regular salmon that would be smoked from someplace else? Do you use something else in it?
Well, we smoke with our own special wood chips that we use, apple and a little bit of birchen, and also the coals, and just how the time that we do it is it helps.
Tastes different.
Yeah, and then we also have a little bit of a dill emulsion, dill oil that infused that what helps out the flavor.
You know what? It tastes very Russian. And the last Russian thing we have, I think you're going to have to hold it. I can't lift it up because I'm busy eating.
That's caviar.
That's caviar. Shall I take the top off of this?
That's Osetra caviar.
This is my favorite. I don't like the real black.
Yeah.
I like the gray.
The beluga caviar is the most expensive. However, we have Osetra. We also feature Sevruga and salmon caviar and American caviar as well.
Because it's a Russian restaurant, you're known for the caviar.
The caviar, yes. Yes, we are.
So, and then you have all the condiments that go with it?
This traditionally goes with toast points, buckwheat blinis, also crackers. People love to eat with crackers.
Well, you've brought so much to us today, and you've taught us so much, and I'm really happy to meet you. I love meeting James Beard chefs.
Well, thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Dennis, for being here. And don't go away because we have author Armen Antonian coming on with his LA Sensation book. Hi, I'm Joan Quinn, and welcome back to the Joan Quinn Profiles. I'm with author Armen Antonian, who was born in Detroit but raised in Los Angeles. He graduated from UCLA and went on to earn a doctorate in political economy and history at UC Riverside. Then you went abroad to study French and Spanish. What did you plan to do with that?
You know, Joan, I originally thought I was going to be a university professor, and at the time, it was in the mid-'80s, the market was really tight, and I really didn't want to leave LA, and so I worked for the Justice Department, I did other things, and then I wound up teaching kids, of all things.
Did you actually, when you went to hone your skills in language, think you were going to teach that in college, or? Right,
I was groomed, you know, if you go for a PhD in one of the academic disciplines like I did, you're kind of groomed to do that. And so it's sort of unusual that I wound up teaching elementary school.
But when you came back from Europe, you started looking at American society.
it totally opened my view up culturally. For example, in food, you know, the Europeans were ahead of us at that time. But when I came back to LA and I began to see the incredible things that were happening with California cuisine, you know, led by Wolfgang Puck, you know, with Spago, but there were many other chefs, Michael McCarty at Michael's and so on. I began to see that there was a Europeanization of LA taking place in the 80s, and then you had the Asian wave in the 90s, and now LA has become this incredible cosmopolitan international city.
Well, I know you love LA, and so do I, but at least I was born here, you weren't.
You have something on me there.
That's okay, because I was a part of this LA growing up and seeing what happened. But culturally, I think on a different tone rather than societal culture, I think that you saw in France, do we have the same kind of cultural events that we're taking off in Europe?
Absolutely. You know, you yourself were an early collector of modern art, and I remember I interviewed you for the book, The LA Sensation, and at that time you were a pioneer, but today, you know, in LA there are all kinds of collectors. Architecture, you know, we have Frank Gehry, one of the world's greatest architects, in our midst. We have the opening of the Disney Hall that just has taken place.
So those were comparing to the cultural advantages that Europe had.
I think so. I think that, you know, but the thing about LA is we're so experimental, and I think modernism has its true calling here in LA. You know, this openness, the light here, and I think we can take advantage of that and make our own mark.
So I'm hearing that you were teaching elementary school and you're remembering what's going on in Europe and you're seeing this big change take place in LA. What did that lead to?
Well, it led to the writing of this book, The LA Sensation.
I'm going to hold this up so you...
I was sitting with a college friend of mine, Lisa Iyer, who also has a PhD from UC Riverside, and we were talking about some of these changes in a cafe, a very European kind of thing to do. And we said, let's write something, and the subject came to be LA. And so we started to do some research. I remember reading some of your old articles in the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner, and it's too bad that newspaper is no longer around.
Oh, I'm so glad somebody read them.
Yeah. And then, of course, the LA Times with Jody Jacobs, your colleague. And so we did some initial research and writing, and then we had an agent at the time who said, you know, you need to do some interviews. And at that point...
But did you think you had a book in that? Did you really think you had a book? And what were you bringing it? What could you write about LA? I mean, you're talking about reading a few society columns from the 80s or late 80s.
Right.
Then you're talking about a few chefs. And what kind of a book is that? How would you put together a book like that?
Well, you know, when you do something like that, I believed I had a book. I spoke to agents who thought you got a magazine article.
Well, that's what I'm wondering, because you have to be convinced of everything you can put into it, which you've done. But I mean, at that time, did you think so?
I thought so. It's something that, you know, when you believe in something, I believe that the city had been maligned. There had been a spattering of books in the 90s about LA that were negative.
And why were they?
Why were they negative?
Why were we so maligned? I love Los Angeles, so...
I think it's, you know, Los Angeles has been colonized by people from the East Coast and the Midwest, and to some extent, you know, we kind of kept our old viewpoints of what a city is. Like, if you're from New York, you know, a city's supposed to be like New York. If you're from Europe, it's supposed to be like Paris.
Oh, but we're a melding of everything.
Right, and I think when people came here, they kept those conceptions, and so there was a sort of our local people, Angelinos as we call them, would sort of knock the city. And then, of course, there's sort of an East Coast press. You know, the publishing world is dominated by East Coast in New York, and they kind of were more inclined to hear things about LA that were negative. You know, Hollywood, it's always sort of like the dirt that you hear.
I always felt that the people in the East Coast were so jealous of what was going on in LA. They always talked about us as being laid back and slow. Well, we had everything, because they always wanted to see movie stars and have, you know, large film companies, and then we had a group of artists that they would never recognize as being anything, which, as you say, we looked at early on, 25, 30 years ago, as being important artists. But you had to convince somebody that LA was worth it.
Well, you know who I had to convince really were the people that we interviewed, and they were, I think, already halfway convinced. When we came to people like, Lily Zanuck, yourself, Carolyn Almonds, Lily Zanuck's the producer for the people on the East Coast. Carolyn Amundsen, who our music center is one of the buildings is named after her.
A great charitable, a woman who's always been busy in charity events.
Right. When we came to these people, they had the same feeling that Lisa and I had, was that the city's been maligned, it's really grown up, it's about time we take stock of that and let people know.
And so you started writing a book.
We started writing the book, The LA Sensation.
And you started interviewing people.
Then we started, well, we had an agent, and the agent says, you guys are PhDs and you've got something here, because at that time we had a couple chapters, but they said you really need to talk to people. I was brought up in sort of a middle class milieu, and she was saying you really need to go out and meet these cultural people, go into some of the finer homes in LA and look around and see what's going on. And we agreed. But I thought, well, geez, that's going to be hard to do.
Hello, how do you do it? You just pick up the phone and call somebody? Can't do that.
Well, that's what I did, though.
That's what you did.
I mean, you were one of the first people I interviewed.
But don't forget, you called, when you called me to interview me, you said, I'm Armen Antonian and I'm Armenian and I know you're Armenian. So that opened a door for me.
Okay.
And then I was able to open more doors for you.
Right. Well, yeah, that's true. I mean, I at that point, I definitely appreciated that I was Armenian. I mean,
Right. But then, if you have the imprimatur of one person saying, yes, I did it with Armen, then the next person will say yes.
Right. Oh, no. Once, exactly. And especially in LA, which is, I think, much more open than East Coast, because there's not a sort of set hierarchy here.
Right.
And people, it's more of a meritocracy. So, yeah, once I interviewed you, and then you had me interview Jody Jacobs, former society editor for the LA Times. And then from there, one thing led to another. And, after you interview one producer like Lily Zanuck, I went to Alan Ladd Jr.'s office in Paramount, called them up, and said, I interviewed Lily Zanuck. You were born in LA. Your father, Alan Ladd, the great Western star of the 50s. I'd like to interview you. And
it opened the door.
It opened the door.
I know, that's so great. So then you got you got all your interviews. I mean, you got a lot of interviews.
About 30 to 35 interviews.
Then you needed photographs, which some of us were able to give you photographs.
Right.
But you still needed more to prove what the city was like.
Well, by that time, I'd become sort of enterprising. Okay?
Oh, you knew what to do.
Right. So
was your publisher still involved?
No, at that the photos we got on our own.
Okay, go on.
The first thing I did is I got on the phone, I called the LA Times, and I said, if I want to run a photo, how much would you charge me? It was an exorbitant amount for one photo. So then I said to myself, we interviewed Alan Berliner, who is one of the most famous Hollywood photographers. He's, done Sharon Stone, I mean, you name it, right?
And all the charity parties.
And all the charity parties. His name is always at the bottom, Alan Berliner, of any of these photos that you read in the newspaper. So I called him up and I says, we've got this book. We want photos for the book. We had interviewed him like 2 years earlier. I said, what can you do for us? And he came through. He put me in contact with his staff. And if you look inside, there are 30-some photos.
I'm going to show the picture that I gave you because I think it's fun. It's with the King of Spain, and went over to meet with the King of Spain. And I also wrote columns about it. And then the pictures on the other side are probably from Alan. I can't tell.
There's one that Joan Hotchkiss gave us, who's the president of the Blue Ribbon of the Music Center. And then that one on the bottom is Eli Broad, Dennis Hopper, and Gagosian of Gagosian Galleries, and that's from Berliner, right?
And then, so you started putting your photographs together, and then what?
Well, then we, these days, because of the internet, and because books can be published differently, we had a lot of options. And what we did is we contacted a company, it's Infinity Publishing, and we created the cover, and we set up a website, lasensation.com, and we worked with them.
You self-published, in other words.
Yes.
Self-published.
Yeah.
And so many people want to do that. And how hard was it? Did you have to have a lot of money to do it?
No. In the old days, you'd have to spend $15,000 or so to publish your book, and you have a distribution house.
That's right.
And then you don't have any publicity. Okay,
Oh, and you got a publicist,
Okay,
though.
so what we did, you can publish the book through these companies are called print on demand, okay, for relatively cheap. And then we had money to hire a publicist. We hired a publicist, and we're off and on our way.
So you picked the title. Did you pick the title?
Yes.
And you self-published, and with the money left over, or with the money that you didn't have to spend, you could hire a publicist who's gotten you on all these NPR and
Right.
all these local radio stations. You've done charity parties. You've spoken at groups of women, and it's amazing. So you're getting this ball going by yourself, in fact.
Yes, but again, we've had help with the publicist, people like yourself. We've had
But
other people who we interviewed.
you have to have some kind of creative ideas, because this book is very interesting. I mean,
Thank
it's
you.
a good read,
Thank you.
and it's like, a lot of my columns, a lot of Jody's columns, but a lot of history and a lot of background. So where does the book actually start?
Well, we do go back to the formation of Los Angeles, and we talk about how really in California, LA was not considered to be the top city. Of course, it was San Francisco. So
Right.
there in and of itself, it's sort of a surprise. How did this city get to be the top city in California? And then how did it get to be a cultural center,
Right.
a focal point for culture in the world?
So you
really.
started with that history, and you built it all the way up. You went all the way through, and then where do you stop?
Well, we stopped with the completion of the Disney Hall. The Disney Hall opened, and we thought that was a good time to stop. That was like a symbol of the coming of age of the city. And for anybody who you have to see the Disney Hall. If you visit LA, if you live in LA, you have to see it. The flowing forms, it's just like it's singing to you. If you
I
look
know.
at it, it's just so phenomenal.
We love it. We love it, and we're glad it's part of LA. And do we see a LA Sensation 2 dose coming out?
That's a tough question. I'd have to talk with Lisa, my co-author. But I think we see some articles coming out that stem from the book. Like on I have an article on minority chefs that I'm pondering, and it's hard to say. My background is actually education, and I want to write also about my teaching. I teach kids, and so I'm going to have to see on that.
Okay, well, we'll be looking for Armen Antonian and LA Sensation, especially, written with Lisa Iyer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, all of you, for watching the Joan Quinn Profiles today, and keep writing to 777 South Figueroa, 44th floor, Los Angeles 90017. And we'll see you next time on the Joan Quinn Profiles.